everybody. This is Raul for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist and composer Joe Policastro. Joe's hailing to us thanks to the wonders of Skype from Chicago. And Joe, welcome to Bass Musician Magazine. We always like to give our, I say readers, but people watch this stuff, a chance to get to know you and your bass journey. So tell us a bit about your beginnings. How did you get started on bass?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's a great honor to do this. And thanks for all the tireless work you do for the bass community, Raul. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I didn't come from a musical family at all. And I think what's so different about today, also just in schools, there are so many now, especially music programs and jazz programs. But at that time in Cincinnati, where I grew up, there was no music in the school. So I was interested in music from the time I was very, very young, but I really had to find everything on my own. I took piano lessons when I was really, really young, but didn't really stick. And I was primarily interested in, like most kids at that time, rock and roll. And I got an electric bass when maybe I was about 10 or 11, and I'll never forget this. I just happened to be in a music store playing, and this guy came up to me, and he's like, "You don't know anything about the bass," and because I wasn't taking any lessons, and he was great. He kind of took me on under his wing. He was an R&B bass player, but he knew a lot about jazz players, and that was the first time he introduced me to Jaco Pastorius. He introduced me to Ray Brown, and to be honest, that was honestly the first time I'd ever even seen an upright bass. I mean, I know I'd probably seen one, but I didn't even make the connection. I knew there was so little music education and such. And that really piqued my curiosity. And I continued to play electric, but by the time I was about 14, I had really transitioned to the upright bass. And I went ahead and started studying with a guy from the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, who really took me under his wing, and I studied classical music very, very seriously for probably about the next 6 or 7 years. I always knew I wanted to head the jazz route. I was much more interested in jazz, and I continued to apprentice in Cincinnati. Cincinnati was great. I mean, there's the Baron John Von Ohlen from Stan Kenton Orchestra still there. He was a big influence on me at that time. Cal Collins, the Concord recording artist, was living there. And there were so many great piano players like Lee Stoller and Phil DeGreg, who's still around there, and Steve Schmidt in the Blue Wisp Jazz Club, which was there. And it was a great time to be a young musician, because these older musicians really did take you under their wing, and you would learn on the job. So that was how I got my start. And after I got done with college, I spent a little bit of time in Germany, and then eventually settled in Chicago, and I've been here for about 15 years now.
Nice, nice. And what was the determining factor for you to transition from electric to upright? What was the thing that made you go, gee, I really like my voice with the upright versus with the electric?
That's an interesting question. Honestly, I think there are two parts to that. I'll never forget the first clip I saw of Ray Brown. It was this clip of the Oscar Peterson Trio, and it honestly blew my mind. And I think the second component was I love the electric bass. It's a great instrument, but something about the double bass, and I remember this. I mean, even though it was very difficult to play at first, it just felt more right in my hands. And within a short period of time, something about the fingering system of it just, in terms of the way melodies and ideas were laying in bass lines, I don't know, it felt better to me. And I know there are people who wonderfully double on both instruments, but it became apparent to me that I needed to focus on one over the other. And I really chose to just focus on that. And at this point, I went years without even owning an electric bass. I do have one again, but I was just making the joke. 2 or 3 years ago, I bought one again for fun, and it's probably been out of the case one time.
Gotcha. Well, and you're absolutely right. When it comes to players that double up, there are very few,
True.
and they really stand out because they can transition from one instrument to the other seamlessly like that.
Sure.
So I think it's not surprising for people to kind of stay with one or the other. So that's that. And from classical music to jazz. Now, jazz being what the only truly authentic American music form, it has been evolving as well. So how did you make that transition?
Well, I always think of the studies that I did with classical music as running parallel to my jazz studies. So I never felt like I was transitioning from classical music to jazz because I had started studying jazz well before I got involved in classical music.
Mm-hmm.
What I was immediately trying to do was take the advanced techniques of the classical music. So, I studied the Raboff technique very, very heavily. Which for all the bass geeks out there, is a lot of people call it the open hand technique, and it has the advanced kind of thumb position techniques. And I started looking for immediate ways to apply that to my jazz playing. So all of those exercises and things, I started looking at the different kind of the more advanced scales or position shapes and finding ways to utilize them for all 12 keys. Because when you're able to use that closed thumb in the upper positions, you can really start to, it makes it so much easier to find universal forms and shapes for D flat and E flat and such going forward. So it was really helpful in that respect, and trying to play the whole range of the double bass. I mean, that's by no means a requirement at all, but if you do want to look at the extended range of the instrument, it was so helpful for that. And I always loved the jazz bow players. Whether you're talking about, the bebop guys like Paul Chambers, or whether you're talking about the more swing era guys like Slam Stewart or Major Holly, there was so much to it was another mode of expression for the double bass and in a jazz setting. So I tried to utilize that as well, and I still do. I really, I take a lot of bow solos. I play a lot of melodies with the bow and try to focus on that.
Nice. And one of the big reasons that we're getting together is because you actually have a new CD, a new project coming out, which is with your trio, and it's titled Screen Sounds. Tell us about this new release. It's coming up in August.
Yes, coming out in August the 11th. The trio has been together for a few years now. It's a real working trio, one that, we play together. We've had this long-running steady gig in Chicago at this place, Pops for Champagne. And for the past, I would say, 2 years, the trio is really kind of expanding beyond Chicago. I mean, it's really working on, a regional presence and national presence, and, we've been touring quite a bit more. And because we get to play together so much, we're able to work on music in sort of project forms. And one that took shape starting at the end of last year was taking all of this movie and TV music and sort of repurposing it for the trio. So that's what this album is. It's a collection, kind of an assemblage of kind of oddball movie and TV music reinterpreted by the trio. So everything from the samurai movie Yojimbo from Akira Kurosawa, we took that orchestral score and reworked it for the trio, to kind of quirky things that you wouldn't even think about covering, like the theme from The Young and the Restless, Taxi, Twin Peaks, The Godfather. Speaking of bow stuff, that's one where it's a big bow feature on there. So that's the album that's coming up.
Yep. And interestingly enough, a lot of that music comes from times that may predate a lot of the current listening audience.
Oh, sure.
People like me go, "Oh, yeah, I remember that," or we were there when this stuff was coming on. But for a newer audience, they might go, "So what's the deal?" What's that about?
Sure.
So how did it come about to be that kind of the focus of what you wanted to do?
Well, honestly, I think when you're talking about jazz, most of what you're dealing with is going to predate audiences. Obviously, outside of new music or their current music being written. If you're playing standards or even bebop tunes, you're talking about stuff that could be anywhere between 50 to close to 100 years old now at this point. I think really we just kind of tend to follow our instincts on it. And interestingly, because this band does perform live so much, we do get a sense of what resonates with people very, very quickly. The very first album we put out was this West Side Story suite for jazz trio, and it was interesting. When we started doing that, I didn't plan on arranging all the music of West Side Story. We just started doing it, and we were getting a great response from it. And then from there, that project took shape. The last album we did was all pop music from the 60s through the 90s, all reworked for a jazz trio. And again, the selections sort of took care of themselves. They were the ones that we felt represented the band the strongest way, and ones that seemed to resonate with people, often even if they didn't recognize the tune. But with the movie and TV stuff especially, though, I feel like there's always someone who recognizes it. I mean, I thought I would never have a person come up and say, "I can't believe you're playing the score to Yojimbo," and it's happened twice now. So,
well, and it's as music is the soundtrack of our lives. The Young and the Restless actually was the theme that we played when I was in college in my astrophysics program at the planetarium, because it was the right music for the subduing of the lights and the stars to come out.
That's wild.
So I'm kind of going, yeah, okay, I know that, but I don't know if anybody does. And it's interesting as time goes by, and you mention a lot of the music that we may hear currently, people don't realize that it has a past with it. And whether it's popular music, and I think some of the ones that come to mind is a lot of the early Beatles tunes had been in Motown well before they decided to do it. I mean, so when you do hear like "Hey, Mr. Postman," done by don't remember who did it, but I know it was done before the Beatles did it. But if it's new, it's like reruns. If you didn't hear it before, now it's new to you. But it does transcend time.
And it's interesting. Just to what you're saying, songs have a different meaning and a different life to different generations. One that we recorded on the album that was kind of a strange pick for quote unquote movie and TV was Leonard Cohen's "Alleluia," and the main reason we had learned it for a different reason, and we were playing it, and somebody came up and they said, "Oh, I love this song from Shrek." And I was like, that's in Shrek? And of course it was. And I ended up looking it up. And that song has been used in everything from One Tree Hill, the TV show. It's been in film and TV over 200 times. And every generation knows it from a different artist. Some people know it from Rufus Wainwright. Some people know it from Leonard Cohen. What's the other version? There's another version of it that's very famous. It's escaping me at the moment. But like what you're saying, these songs have they all have a past, but they also have a different relationship and meaning to different people.
Now, with songs, kind of like with one's children, a lot of times one tries not to have a favorite. But do you have a favorite track on your new CD? What's your favorite tune?
Boy, that's a tough one. I honestly, I keep coming back to Yojimbo. I just probably because it's so much fun to play, and I love that. I'm a huge movie and TV fan, which is probably another reason why we did this as well. And to go back to your question before about how I got into music, movies and television had a big effect on me. I mean, some of the first artists I ever saw, jazz and otherwise, were on shows like David Letterman or Saturday Night Live. But soundtracks to movies were were something that always sent me down another path. I would hear I remember one of the first jazz soundtracks I ever heard in The Hustler. I mean, that kind of blew my mind, and I think it's Phil Woods on all of that. The Kurosawa film Yojimbo, if you're a movie buff, I mean, talk about an epic filmmaker and an epic film. And just that film's relationship to the Sergio Leone films and the Man with No Name trilogy, I would say that one is probably my favorite. It's probably the least quote unquote bass focused one on the album, but there's still, I mean, I consider myself as much an arranger and writer as I do bass player. So that was a big challenge to take an orchestral score like that incorporates Japanese instruments and full big band and try to reduce it to a jazz trio of guitar, bass, and drums.
Gotcha. And even with the CD releasing in August, do you guys have any plans for the trio? Anything coming up?
Oh yeah, we have three kind of different legs of our tours starting July the 29th. Mostly Midwest and East Coast, especially for this part of the year. We're working on some stuff for 2018 where we're trying to get out west. But yeah, we're going to be, if you want to check the trio out, it's www.thejptrio.com, and we have our full schedule up there. But I mean, we have probably 20 to 25 cities that we'll be visiting throughout the fall and throughout the end of summer and early fall.
Excellent. And I always know, because everybody, one of the common threads among us bassists is our affection or obsession, depending how you look at it, for gear.
Mm-hmm.
With upright players, since I suppose if you had 50 basses, you'd have nowhere to live. You tend to keep it more simple. But tell us about what you're using. What are you playing on?
So the bass that I have was made by the great Albert Jackstad, who's still a living maker. He's in his 90s and now lives down in Florida. He was he formerly lived in East Germany, back when that existed. Emigrated to the U.S. and settled in Cincinnati. There was a very famous bass shop in Cincinnati that he was a luthier there, and he started making his own instruments. And I acquired the bass not directly from Albert, but from one of the members of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. So it's a quote-unquote newer instrument. It was made in 1992 or 94. I got it around 1998, and I absolutely love the instrument. So it's a fully carved, flat back, Gamba designed German bass.
Nice.
I play German bow. I have a snakewood German bow that I play, and then for amplification, I go very, very simple. Obviously, for clubs, you don't need to deal with that much, so I use the Mark Bass, their combo amplifier, the 15-inch. It's a very powerful amplifier, so if I need, when I'm playing festivals and stuff, they can generally take a line off of that. But I usually, for larger things, ask for a mic for the amplification for the house system, and we'll usually just use the amp or a line out of that through a monitor for reinforcement. I use a realist pickup, David Gage, and the flight case I use was made by a company called Tough Light, which is a good case, but honestly, it's been so hard to fly with full size instruments these days. We basically are always in the car, which is the big problem we have about getting to the West Coast, of course. And I don't mind renting instruments, but it's really, I'm one of those people who prefers to have my bass if I can do it.
Oh, of course. There's, and it's one thing when you hear like a lot of the more rock groups, if they do a European tour, they get it set up with amplifiers or stuff, and you go, okay, yeah, I get that. But the instrument, I mean, that is your voice, and there's the subtleties that, especially with acoustic instruments. I mean, age is one of these interesting ones. The older the wood is, these things mature. I mean, there's nothing they can do that, and they have tried doing some baking and some things to the wood, or starting out with old wood to begin with. But there just seems to be something about kind of lining up all the factors that contribute to something being like a Stradivarius, where you kind of go, okay, it was the right wood, the right time, the right shop, the right shellac,
absolutely,
or something. I mean, there's so many things. I was just seeing a post yesterday where somebody had done a resurface on an acoustic guitar, and they took it in for, I don't know, they took it to their shop, and the whole layer of the varnish or shellac or something peeled off in one big
Oh my
piece.
gosh.
And so there was a photo of this kind of brownish, clearish stuff that had the exact size and shape of the instrument it was next to. And you kind of go, yeah, that wasn't good the way that worked out. But there's also the delicate factor when you
Of
have
course.
acoustic instruments. And fairly recently we saw actually, he was coming. He was talking to us from Chicago. Nathan Laurel, who plays with Cirque,
Oh.
has a very interesting upright. It's called the Gota. It looks like a drop,
Hmm.
and the headstock looks like it was fabricated in Whoville by Dr. Seuss because it goes in to this crazy spiral. It's the most beautiful thing, and it got broken in the Dominican Republic.
Oh
They
gosh.
snapped the curl off of this thing. And I'm just like, oh, that's just so painful to see. But so it is a real challenge with the best of cases and with policies the way they are that you can't, buy it a seat to take it with you necessarily everywhere you
No,
go.
that's
And
those days are long gone. I actually, not to stress this point too much, but I mean, I actually won't even fly with my jackstat anymore because around 2002, I had a flight from Europe back to the States, and they wouldn't let my bass on the plane, so they forced me to send it cargo,
mm,
and so I was separated from the instrument. And then it got held up for some reason. It was delivered 2 days later than because I was supposed to just obviously take it with me there. It was delivered 2 days later, and they had dropped the bass from the belly of the plane when they were unloading it
mm.
because the entire top they cracked the flight case. And I mean it's almost impossible to do. The instrument had tumbled from the belly of the plane upside down, landed on the neck, completely snapped the neck off of the instrument. I mean, it was a $10,000 settlement with with the airline. I mean, fortunately they took care of it, but I mean, it was 6 months repair. I actually had to have the original maker get involved and stuff, recarve the neck, and that one of the great bass shops in Cincinnati actually was the one who put it all back together, and it's as good as new. But wow, what a time-consuming and horrendous moment that was.
Oh, I tell you, and that I think that may be one of the arguments for the electric players that go, see, I can fit mine in the overhead.
Sure, sure. No, I'm always jealous. I mean, the group being a guitar trio, I'm always so jealous of the guitarists. They're like, I'm always freaking out. I'm renting instruments if we're doing, if we have something over, out overseas, or even if I'm just traveling with another group, and everybody else just got their little stuff, little saxophone right up there, and here's your guitar in the overhead, and.
I gotcha. Well, Joe, we appreciate you taking time to chat with us. We're excited about the new CD that's coming out. People, remember that you can find out information on that at thejptrio.com.
Mhm.
Okay. Also, for more information about what you're doing, is the best website joepolicastro.com?
Yeah, if you want to just find out about what I'm doing as a player with different projects and as a sideman and stuff, that's definitely the way to go. But if for the trio, I mean that website links to the trio's website, but for the stuff that the band is doing, definitely the jptrio.com.
Great, great. Well, and as I was also meaning to say, it's always a pleasure to have a chance to talk with some of our upright playing brothers. I know that I wish we had a greater representation in what we do with the upright players. Again, I see a whole lot of electric stuff, and I think probably it would be interesting. I don't know if anybody did a demographic study to see what the ratio of upright players to electric players is. But it's always great to hear from you guys and what you're doing and what you're dealing with, and hopefully some of our upright playing readers will go finally something that I can relate to and understand and grasp and has meaning for me. So Joe, thank you
Well, I will
so much
also
again.
say bass is bass, though. It doesn't really. I mean, when it comes down to it, I think we're all focusing on the same things and striving for the same aspects of music making. So.
Oh, I agree, and the components and the job that we're doing, whether you're laying down the groove or the percussive nature of the tying in the melody, and
Sure.
and I'll even add this because we recently had a chance. They demoed the octo bass for us
Hmm.
down in Arizona, and this 12-foot behemoth of an upright. The whole key thing with this has so much to do with in the music you feeling the bass. It's that as it punches you in the sternum that you capture, but it creates the feeling to the music that you're hearing, which is why in this setting, they didn't have amplification and they wanted to hit those notes, and they're like, well, so we'll build this 12-foot bass and
Right.
and leave it in the venue, and so
Right.
who's going to carry that around? I mean,
Right. Exactly.
it's crazy, and because of the sheer size of it, it has to use levers and like a capo system, so you're not fingering. I mean, you can bow it, but it's I think the low note is around 16 hertz or something ridiculous like that,
That's absurd.
and
Yeah.
and you feel it. You don't really hear it, and actually somebody had mentioned that when they do that note, where you actually kind of perceive it is out into the foyer and kind of around the corner, and that's where it hits you.
Oh.
And there's this note. So anyway, again, Joe, thanks so much for taking time chatting with us. People, check out the new Screen Sounds CD. If you are a TV or movie buff, you'll relate to some of these, and you'll probably going, oh, I remember where I was when I heard fill in the blank, whether it was watching Taxi on reruns or you were in the planetarium where I was working for the Young and the Restless.
Yeah. Right.
So again, thanks so much, people. You're hearing this here. Joe Policastro coming to you live on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks so much, Raul.